I looked at the divorce papers in my shaking hands as Marcus packed his designer suitcase, each fold of his expensive shirts a knife twist in my chest. "Isabella's father is buying me a partnership at Goldman Sachs," he said without looking at me. "We're getting married next month." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same hands that had once promised to love me in sickness and in poverty were now reaching for a fortune built on someone else's inheritance. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had died once before. In my previous life, I had been Sarah Chen, a brilliant but naive software engineer who married young and trusted completely. That Marcus, a different version of the same soul, had also left me for money, though then it was for a tech heiress named Victoria. I had died alone in a car accident at 28, heartbroken and financially ruined after he'd drained our joint accounts. But somehow, impossibly, I had woken up in this life as Elena Vasquez, born to a poor family in Queens, with all my memories intact and a burning knowledge of exactly how the future would unfold. The gift, or curse, of rebirth had shown me many things. I knew that Bitcoin would surge. I knew which startups would fail and which would soar. I knew that social media would transform from a college experiment into the backbone of human connection. Most importantly, I knew that Marcus Hawthorne, in every life, was a man who would always choose money over love. But this time, I was ready for him. 7 years earlier, when I first met Marcus at Columbia Business School, I already knew our entire story. I had watched him scan the room at that networking mixer, his eyes calculating each person's potential value. When those same brown eyes landed on me, the scholarship kid in the borrowed dress, I saw the exact moment he dismissed me as unworthy. Just like before. But this time, I had Bitcoin. I had spent my teenage years working multiple jobs, not to help my struggling family as everyone believed, but to buy cryptocurrency when it was still pennies per coin. By the time I entered Columbia, I was already worth millions, though I lived like I was still poor. I dated Marcus not out of naivety, but as part of a larger plan that had been forming since the day I first opened my eyes in this second life. I let him court me with his practiced charm. I let him believe he was settling for less when he chose me over the obviously wealthy Isabella Hartwell. I played the part of the grateful poor girl who couldn't believe her luck, even as I secretly bought stock in every company I knew would succeed. Amazon, Google, Tesla, before anyone had heard of electric cars. The hardest part wasn't pretending to be naive, it was pretending to love him. Because the memory of betrayal never fades, even across lifetimes. Every kiss felt like ash. Every "I love you" was a lie wrapped in strategy, but I needed him to marry me. I needed him to reveal his true nature publicly, dramatically, and completely. So when he proposed on a beach in the Hamptons, I said yes with tears in my eyes that he mistook for joy. When we exchanged vows, I promised to love him forever, knowing that forever would last exactly 7 years. And when he started working late with Isabella Hartwell 6 months ago, I began the final phase of my plan. The revelation that Isabella's trust fund came from Hartwell Industries, a massive defense contracting corporation, had made me smile. In my previous life, I had been a software engineer. In this one, I had spent years becoming an expert in corporate acquisitions, hostile takeovers, and the intricate dance of high finance. I had also been buying shares of Hartwell Industries for 3 years, using shell companies and offshore accounts to hide my growing ownership. By the time Marcus handed me those divorce papers, I owned 37% of Isabella's family fortune. "You know what, Marcus?" I said, setting the papers aside with steady hands. "I think this is for the best." He paused in his packing, probably expecting tears or pleas. "Really? Really, I've been doing some thinking about my future. My financial advisor thinks I should diversify my portfolio." Marcus laughed, that condescending chuckle I remembered so well from both lives. "Elena, you work at a nonprofit. What portfolio?" I pulled out my phone and showed him my Schwab app. His face went white as he processed the number. $847 million in assets under management. That's not possible," he stammered. "Oh, this isn't even everything. This is just my personal trading account. Would you like to see my business holdings?" The color drained from his face completely as I swiped to another screen showing my ownership stakes in dozens of companies. Tesla, Amazon, Bitcoin, and yes, a significant portion of Hartwell Industries. Where did you get the money? I smiled sweetly. Inheritance from my great aunt in Spain. She invested in some cryptocurrency thing years ago. Who knew, right? It was a lie, of course. But Marcus didn't need to know about previous lives and impossible second chances. He just needed to understand that the poor little scholarship girl he was discarding had somehow become worth more than his precious Isabella could ever dream of being. I watched him struggle with the math, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and the first hints of panic. But you live so simply. You drive that old Honda, you shop at Target. Rich people who stay rich don't live like they're on reality TV, Marcus. That's a lesson Isabella's family apparently never learned. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella, and I saw her name light up his screen. Perfect timing. You should go, I said gently. You have a new life to start. I hope it makes you very happy. But as he wheeled his suitcase toward the door, I called out one last thing. Oh, and Marcus, you might want to read the financial news tomorrow. I hear Hartwell Industries is about to have some interesting developments. The door slammed behind him, and I allowed myself the first genuine smile I'd felt in 7 years. Marcus had always been predictable, and Isabella Hartwell was even more so. Born into wealth, raised in privilege, she had never faced a single day of real adversity. In my previous life, Victoria had been cut from the same cloth. Beautiful, entitled, and completely unprepared for actual hardship. Isabella was no different. She lived in a penthouse that Daddy had bought, drove cars that Daddy had gifted, and had never held a real job in her 26 years of existence. Her idea of independence was choosing which charity gala to attend. Her greatest accomplishment was a blog about sustainable fashion that she'd started and abandoned after 3 posts. Marcus, meanwhile, had been living beyond his means for years, funding his lifestyle with credit cards and loans, always expecting that his eventual partnership at a major firm would solve his money problems. What he didn't realize was that Isabella's father, Robert Hartwell, was already planning to cut his daughter off financially. The old man was dying, pancreatic cancer, though he was keeping it quiet, and he'd grown disgusted with Isabella's frivolous spending and poor judgment in men. I knew this because I'd made it my business to know everything about the Hartwell family. My first move had been subtle, a series of anonymous tips to financial journalists about irregularities in Hartwell Industries' government contracts. Nothing illegal, just questionable. Overcharges here, delayed deliveries there. The kind of things that made for juicy exposés but weren't quite criminal. The story started hitting 2 weeks after Marcus moved out. Small pieces at first, buried in the business pages. But I had also been feeding information to a particular investigative journalist named David Kim, whose previous work on defense contractor corruption had won him a Pulitzer. I'd been building a relationship with him for 2 years, positioning myself as a concerned whistleblower who had stumbled across information about Hartwell Industries. The beauty of my plan was that everything I revealed was true. Robert Hartwell had been skirting ethical lines for years, writing on old relationships and assuming his political connections would protect him forever. But times were changing, and the political winds were shifting away from the old boys network that had made him rich. As the stories gained momentum, Hartwell Industries' stock price began to wobble. Nothing dramatic at first, just a steady decline that nervous investors attributed to normal market fluctuations. But I knew it was only the beginning. My second move was more direct. I scheduled a meeting with Robert Hartwell himself. The Hartwell Industries building was exactly what I'd expected. 40 stories of glass and steel in Midtown Manhattan, every surface polished to an intimidating shine. The kind of place designed to make visitors feel small and unimportant. But I'd learned to navigate spaces like this. I'd learned to use my appearance, young, Latina, unassuming, as camouflage while I positioned the pieces on the board. Robert Hartwell was dying, but he was fighting it with the same ruthless determination that had built his empire. At 64, he was still imposing, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. He agreed to see me because my assistant had been very vague about the nature of my business, and because men like Robert Hartwell were always curious about potential opportunities. "Miss Vasquez," he said as I entered his corner office, windows showing a commanding view of the city. "I understand you wanted to discuss a business proposition. Please call me Elena, and yes, I'm interested in discussing your company's future." He gestured to a chair across from his massive desk. "I'll be honest, I've never heard of your firm. Vasquez Holdings, that's a new name in defense contracting." "We're more focused on acquisitions than contracting," I said, settling into the chair with the same calm I'd practiced in a dozen boardrooms. "I'm here to make you an offer for Hartwell Industries." Robert laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Miss Vasquez, I appreciate your ambition, but Hartwell Industries isn't for sale. We're a family company built over 40 years. My daughter will inherit. Your daughter is going to inherit a company facing federal investigation, class action lawsuits, and criminal charges," I interrupted softly. "Would you really want to leave her that legacy?" The laughter died in his throat. "I don't know what you're talking about." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "The Pentagon is launching a formal investigation into your Syria contracts. The Justice Department is looking at your hiring practices. The SEC wants to examine your books for the last 5 years." I placed photograph after photograph on his desk, documents, emails, recorded conversations. "Your former employee, Michael Rodriguez, is very eager to testify about the shortcuts you ordered him to take on safety inspections." Robert's face had gone ashen. "How did you— These are classified." "Nothing here is classified, Mr. Hartwell. It's all information that will be public within the next 60 days. I'm simply ahead of the curve." In truth, I had been working with Michael Rodriguez for 18 months. In my previous life, I had read about his testimony in a congressional hearing that had destroyed several defense contractors. In this life, I had found him first, offered him protection and a significant financial incentive to come forward with his evidence. Rodriguez was a good man who had been carrying guilt about Hartwell's corner cutting for years. All he needed was assurance that someone would listen and protect him. "What do you want?" Robert asked quietly. "I want to buy your company before the scandal breaks. I'll pay fair market value, $2.8 billion, and I'll take responsibility for all pending legal issues. Your daughter keeps her trust fund. You retire quietly, and Hartwell Industries disappears into my holdings. No congressional hearings, no perp walks, no family name dragged through the newspapers. You're talking about billions of dollars. No one your age has that kind of capital." I smiled and pulled out my phone, showing him my banking app. Not the Schwab account I'd shown Marcus, but my real business account. The one that held the profits from 7 years of perfectly timed investments, cryptocurrency trades, and strategic stock purchases. Robert stared at the screen for a long moment. $4.3 billion in liquid assets, plus credit lines totaling another $6 billion. "I've been preparing for this acquisition for 3 years, Mr. Hartwell. The question is whether you want to do this the easy way or the hard way." I let him process that for a moment before continuing. "The easy way. You announce your retirement for health reasons, sell to me quietly, and spend your remaining years in peace. The hard way? The scandal breaks next month. Your stock becomes worthless. Your daughter inherits nothing but legal bills, and your family name becomes synonymous with corruption and fraud." Robert was quiet for a long time, staring out his windows at the city he'd spent decades conquering. Finally, he spoke without turning around. "How long do I have to decide?" 24 hours. After that, my offer expires, and you deal with the consequences alone." I stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Oh, and Mr. Hartwell? You might want to have a conversation with your daughter about her choice in fiancé. Marcus Hawthorne has been carrying significant debt for years, and I suspect his interest in Isabella is more financial than romantic." The old man's reflection in the window showed no surprise at all. 22 hours later, Robert Hartwell called to accept my offer. The news broke on a Tuesday morning that would forever change several lives. I was sitting in my lawyer's office finalizing the paperwork for the Hartwell acquisition when my phone started buzzing with frantic calls from Marcus. I let it go to voicemail, then another call, another voicemail. By the third call, I was curious enough to listen to his messages. "Elena, what the hell is going on? Isabella's father just disowned her. He sold the company to some woman named Vasquez. Elena, please tell me this can't be you. Call me back. The second message was more desperate. Elena, I know you're there. Pick up the phone. Isabella is having a complete breakdown. Her father cut off her trust fund, her credit cards, everything. The wedding is off. Please, we need to talk. The third message was barely coherent. Oh God, Elena, what have you done? The news is saying the new owner of Hartwell Industries is Elena Vasquez from Queens. That's you, isn't it? How is this possible? How could you do this to us? I saved the messages and went back to reviewing contracts. The beautiful thing about Marcus was his complete inability to conceive of a world where he wasn't the smartest person in the room. Even faced with obvious evidence, he couldn't quite believe that the woman he'd dismissed as beneath him had orchestrated his downfall with surgical precision. That evening, he appeared at my door. The confident man who had packed his suitcase just 3 weeks earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Let me in, Elena. We need to talk. Actually, we don't. You made your choice very clear when you handed me divorce papers. This is insane. He pushed past me into the apartment, our former apartment, which I had already decided to abandon for something more suited to my actual net worth. You destroyed Isabella's life. You destroyed my life. For what? Revenge? I closed the door and turned to face him calmly. I didn't destroy anything, Marcus. I simply allowed the truth to come to light. Robert Hartwell was running a corrupt company. His daughter was living off blood money. You were marrying her for financial security. These are all facts. You know that's not why I left you? No. I tilted my head, genuinely curious. Then why did you leave me? He struggled for words, probably because he'd never had to articulate his real motivations before. I fell in love with Isabella. You fell in love with Isabella's bank account. There's a difference. That's not true. Marcus, in the 7 years we were together, you never once looked at me the way you looked at her credit cards. You never once chose me over a business opportunity. You never once prioritized our relationship over your ambition. And that's fine. People are allowed to have priorities, but don't stand in my living room and lie to my face about love. He stared at me like I was a stranger, which I suppose I was. The Elena he'd married had been a performance, carefully calculated to appeal to his ego while serving my larger purpose. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now you figure out how to live with the consequences of your choices. Isabella is learning to support herself for the first time in her life. I hear she's applied for a job at Nordstrom. You still have your MBA and your experience. I'm sure you'll land somewhere eventually. Elena, please, I know I hurt you, but this is too much. I'll do anything. Anything, I interrupted. Would you have chosen me if I'd never had money? If I'd stayed poor forever? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. That's what I thought, I said gently. Marcus, I want you to understand something. This was never about getting you back. This was about making sure you understood exactly what you chose and what you lost. You traded a woman who would have loved you forever for someone who would have left you the moment her trust fund ran out. How can you possibly know that? Because I know you, Marcus, and I know women like Isabella. She was never going to love you through bankruptcy or illness or failure. She was going to love you through good times and abandon you the moment things got difficult, just like you abandoned me. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, each one representing someone else's dreams and struggles and broken hearts. The irony is that if you had stayed faithful, if you had loved me for who I was, instead of what you thought I wasn't, we would have been building an empire together. Instead, you chose to chase money and lost both love and fortune. When I turned back around, Marcus was crying. Not the pretty, controlled tears of a movie star, but ugly, desperate sobs that shook his whole body. He collapsed onto the couch, our former couch, and buried his face in his hands. I'm sorry, he whispered between sobs. I'm so sorry, Elena. I threw away everything good in my life for nothing. Isabella won't even return my calls. Her father wants me prosecuted for fraud. Apparently, she was using his credit cards to pay for our wedding plans. I have nothing left. For a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. But then I remembered sitting in that same spot 7 years ago, crying just as hard while he packed his bags without a single backward glance. I remembered the humiliation of being discarded like trash. I remembered the loneliness and betrayal that had poisoned every day since. Marcus, I said softly, this is what you left me with. This exact feeling, this exact despair. The only difference is that I was innocent and you're not. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Can you ever forgive me? I considered the question seriously. In my previous life, I had died without ever getting closure. I had died believing that I deserved to be abandoned, that I wasn't enough, that love was something other people got to experience. But this time, I had been given the ultimate gift, the chance to show someone exactly what they had thrown away. I already have forgiven you, I said. Forgiveness isn't about you, Marcus. It's about me choosing to move forward without carrying anger. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean erasing consequences. You made choices, and now you live with them. I walked to the door and opened it. Goodbye, Marcus. I genuinely hope you find a way to be happy with the life you've chosen. He stood slowly like an old man and shuffled toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. Will I ever see you again? Probably not. I'm moving to California next month. I bought a company there that I want to personally oversee. It was true. I had acquired a small tech startup in Palo Alto that reminded me of my engineering days. But more than that, I was ready to stop living in the shadow of Marcus's betrayal. I had gotten my revenge, and now I wanted to build something new. Take care of yourself, I said, and closed the door for the last time. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office in Silicon Valley, reviewing quarterly reports from my various holdings, when my assistant buzzed me with an unusual request. Miss Vasquez, there's a woman here to see you. She says her name is Isabella Hartwell and that it's about her father's company. I almost laughed. I had wondered when this conversation would happen. Send her in. The Isabella who entered my office was nothing like the polished socialite I remembered from her engagement photos. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect hair. This Isabella wore off-the-rack business attire and looked like she'd been crying recently. But there was something different in her posture, something that suggested she'd been learning hard lessons about the world. Miss Vasquez, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Please sit. What can I do for you? Isabella perched on the edge of the chair like she might need to run at any moment. I want to understand why you destroyed my family. Direct. I appreciated that. I didn't destroy your family, Isabella. I revealed the truth about your family. There's a significant difference. My father is dying, you know. The stress of the scandal accelerated his cancer. I'm sorry to hear about his illness, but your father's cancer existed long before I bought his company. The scandal would have broken with or without me. I simply controlled how it happened. Isabella stared at me for a long moment. You know about Marcus, don't you? You know that he was my fiancé before everything fell apart. I do. Then this was personal. This was revenge. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. She was prettier than I had expected, but there was also an intelligence there that I hadn't anticipated. Would you like to know the truth about Marcus? What do you mean? I mean, would you like to know why he really wanted to marry you? Isabella's face went pale. He loved me. He loved your money. He was carrying over $300,000 in debt when he proposed to you. Credit cards, student loans, personal loans from friends. His plan was to use your wedding as an opportunity to pay everything off with your father's money. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a recording I'd made months earlier. This is Marcus talking to his friend James at a bar in Midtown. Would you like to hear it? Isabella nodded numbly. I pressed play, and Marcus's voice filled the office. The Hartwell girl is perfect. Rich daddy, no prenup, and she's so naive she actually believes I'm in love with her. I'll be set for life. Elena was smart, but smart women ask too many questions. Isabella just wants to plan weddings and shop. The blood drained from Isabella's face as the recording continued. The best part is that she thinks she's rescuing me from a loveless marriage, like she's some kind of romantic heroine. It's almost too easy. I stopped the recording and waited. Isabella was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. How long have you known? I've known Marcus for a very long time, long enough to understand exactly who he is and what he values. And you let me think I was taking him away from you. You let me believe I was the other woman. You were the other woman, Isabella. The fact that Marcus was using you doesn't change that. You made a choice to pursue a married man. You made a choice to believe his lies about being unhappy. You made a choice to help him betray someone who had never done anything to hurt you. Isabella's composure finally cracked, and tears started streaming down her face. I didn't know you. I didn't think about you as a real person. You were just an obstacle. That's the thing about being wealthy from birth, I said gently. It's easy to forget that other people have feelings and dreams and hearts that can be broken. It's easy to see the world as a series of objects to be acquired instead of lives to be considered. I lost everything, she whispered. My trust fund, my apartment, my friends. Everyone I thought cared about me disappeared the moment the money was gone. I've been working retail for 6 months just to pay rent on a studio apartment in Queens. How does it feel? Isabella looked up at me, surprised by the question. Terrifying, humiliating, but also... She paused, searching for the right words. It's the first time in my life that I've had to rely on myself. The first time I've had to actually work for something. I hate it, but I'm also kind of proud of it, if that makes sense. It did make sense. In my previous life, poverty had been crushing and desperate. But this version of poverty, the kind that came with education and connections and the possibility of climbing back up, could indeed be transformative. What do you want from me, Isabella? I want to know if there's any chance of getting a job with Hartwell Industries. I know you own it now, and I know I have no right to ask, but I understand the business. I grew up around it, and I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. I studied her carefully. This was not a conversation I had anticipated, but it was interesting nonetheless. What makes you think you could work for me? Because I understand what it's like to lose everything. Because I understand what it's like to discover that the person you loved was using you. Because I've learned the difference between having money and earning money. She met my eyes directly. And because I think you're probably the smartest person I've ever met, and I want to learn from you. You realize that working for me means working for the woman who destroyed your old life. You didn't destroy my old life. You revealed that my old life was built on lies and corruption and exploitation. Maybe that needed to be destroyed. I was quiet for several minutes, considering. In my previous life, Victoria had never shown this kind of self-awareness. She had remained entitled and bitter until the end, blaming everyone but herself for her problems. But Isabella seemed to be genuinely evolving, genuinely learning from her experiences. I'll make you a deal, I said finally. I'll give you a 6-month trial position as an analyst in my acquisitions department. You'll make $40,000 a year plus benefits, which I suspect is less than you used to spend on handbags. You'll work 60-hour weeks, you'll do whatever tasks I assign, and you'll be evaluated based on performance alone. If you prove yourself valuable, we'll discuss a permanent position. If not, you'll leave with no hard feelings and a decent reference. Isabella's eyes widened. You're serious? I'm always serious about business. The question is whether you're serious about changing your life. Yes, she said immediately. Yes, absolutely, I won't let you down. See that you don't. And Isabella, if you ever breathe a word about my personal history with Marcus to anyone in this company, you'll be fired immediately and blacklisted from every decent firm in the country. This is a professional relationship based on mutual benefit, nothing more. I understand. As Isabella left my office, I reflected on the strange turns that life could take. In my previous life, I had died alone and broken, betrayed by a husband who valued money over love. In this life, I had not only gotten revenge, but had also somehow ended up in a position to offer redemption to the woman who had helped destroy my marriage. Whether Isabella would prove worthy of that redemption remained to be seen. But for the first time since my rebirth, I felt like I was moving beyond the past and towards something genuinely new. The The final pieces of my revenge had fallen into place more beautifully than I had ever dared hope. Marcus, it turned out, had indeed been investigated for fraud. When Isabella's credit card bills revealed that she'd been spending her father's money on wedding expenses, and when Robert Hartwell discovered that Marcus had known about the family's financial vulnerabilities all along, the old man had pressed charges. Marcus was currently facing trial for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and theft of services. The irony was perfect. He had betrayed me for money and ended up losing his freedom because of money. But the real satisfaction came from what I had built in the aftermath. Under my leadership, the former Hartwell Industries had been completely restructured. I had eliminated the corrupt practices, settled the outstanding lawsuits, and pivoted the company toward legitimate government contracts focused on renewable energy infrastructure. The employees who had been forced to compromise their ethics under Robert Hartwell's leadership were finally able to do work they could be proud of. Isabella, surprisingly, had become one of my most valuable employees. The spoiled socialite had disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who worked harder than anyone else in the company and who brought genuine insights to our acquisition strategy. She had an intuitive understanding of how wealthy families made decisions, which proved invaluable when we were evaluating potential purchases. After her 6-month trial period, I had promoted her to senior analyst and given her a substantial raise. We never spoke about Marcus or her father or the circumstances that had brought us together. In the office, we were simply two professionals working toward shared goals. But sometimes I caught her looking at me with an expression that suggested she understood exactly how much grace she had been shown. A year after the acquisition, I received an unexpected visitor. Robert Hartwell had aged dramatically since our last meeting. The cancer was winning, and he looked every day of his 65 years, but he was still sharp, still commanding, and he had requested a meeting with what he called urgent family business. "Miss Vasquez," he said as he settled carefully into the chair across from my desk. "Thank you for seeing me. I know our last meeting ended with some hard feelings." "Not on my end, Mr. Hartwell. You made a smart business decision under difficult circumstances. I hope you're at peace with it." "I am. That's actually why I'm here." He pulled out a leather portfolio and set it on my desk. "I'm dying, as you probably know. 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky. I've been putting my affairs in order, and there's something I need to discuss with you." I opened the portfolio and found legal documents transferring Robert's remaining personal assets, his art collection, his real estate holdings, his investment accounts, to a trust fund administered by my company. The beneficiary was listed as Isabella Hartwell. "I don't understand," I said. "My daughter has changed dramatically since she started working for you. She's become the woman I always hoped she could be, but never knew how to teach her to become. She's learned the value of work, the importance of integrity, and the difference between earning respect and buying it." Robert's voice was rough with emotion. "I want to give her back her inheritance, but I want it to be managed by someone who will ensure she never forgets the lessons she's learned." I stared at the documents. The trust was worth approximately $50 million. Enough to make Isabella wealthy again, but structured in a way that would require her to continue working and meeting performance benchmarks to access the funds. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're the only person who has ever held my daughter accountable for her actions. Because you destroyed her old life and gave her the opportunity to build a better one. Because she respects you in a way she never respected me." "Mr. Hartwell, this is an enormous responsibility, and frankly, given our history, I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to control your daughter's financial future." Robert smiled, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from him. "Miss Vasquez, you've already been controlling her future for the past year, and she's thriving. I can't think of anyone better qualified to continue." I reviewed the trust documents carefully. They were expertly crafted, designed to provide Isabella with financial security while incentivizing continued personal growth. She would receive a modest annual stipend immediately, with larger distributions tied to professional achievements and charitable contributions. The principal would remain untouchable until she turned 40, at which point she could inherit fully if she had met all the trust's requirements. "What does Isabella know about this?" I asked. "Nothing, and I'd prefer to keep it that way until after I'm gone. I want her to continue working for you because she wants to, not because she's waiting for an inheritance." I set the documents aside and studied Robert's face. This is really about redemption, isn't it? You're trying to undo the damage of raising her with unlimited wealth and no accountability. I spent 40 years building a fortune and 40 minutes raising a daughter. I gave her everything except the tools to deserve it. Robert's voice was barely above a whisper. You gave her those tools in 1 year. This trust is my way of acknowledging that you succeeded where I failed. It was a strange conversation to be having with a man I had effectively destroyed. But there was something deeply satisfying about seeing him recognize the value of what I had built from the wreckage of his empire. I'll need to have my lawyers review the documents thoroughly before I agree to anything, I said. Of course, but Miss Vasquez? Robert stood carefully, leaning heavily on his cane. Whatever else you think of me, please know that I'm grateful. You saved my daughter's life, even if you destroyed mine in the process. That's a trade I'm happy to make. After he left, I sat alone in my office thinking about the strange geometry of revenge and redemption. I had set out to punish the people who had wronged me, but somehow I had ended up in a position to guide their recovery. The woman who had helped steal my husband was now working to earn my approval. The man who had raised her to be shallow and entitled was entrusting me with her future. It wasn't the ending I had planned, but it was perhaps a better one than I had deserved. Robert Hartwell died on a Tuesday morning in November, peacefully in his sleep according to the hospital. I attended his funeral, a small private service with only a handful of mourners. Isabella delivered a eulogy that was honest about her father's flaws while acknowledging his final attempts at redemption. She cried quietly throughout the service, and I found myself surprisingly moved by her grief. After the burial, she approached me in the cemetery parking lot. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It meant a lot to have you there. Your father was a complicated man, but he loved you very much." "I know. And I know that he tried to make amends for the mistakes he made with the company. With me." Isabella looked out at the gray November sky. "I've been thinking about what I want to do next, whether I want to stay with the company or try something else." This was the moment I had been dreading. With her father gone and her trial period long over, Isabella was free to leave and start fresh somewhere else. I had grown to depend on her insights and work ethic, but more than that, I had come to genuinely respect the person she had become. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I'd like to stay, if you'll have me, but I want to do more than just acquisitions. I've been researching renewable energy projects, and I think there's an opportunity to use our defense contracts as a bridge into large-scale solar and wind installations. The government is going to spend billions on green infrastructure over the next decade, and we're positioned perfectly to capture that market." I was impressed despite myself. Isabella had identified exactly the same opportunity I'd been exploring for months. That's an ambitious pivot. It would require significant capital investment and regulatory approval. I know, but I also know that this company needs to keep evolving if it's going to survive long-term. Defense contracting is becoming more competitive and more scrutinized. We need to diversify before we're forced to. She was right, of course, and her proposal demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking that made her valuable beyond her family connections or insider knowledge. "Write me a full proposal," I said. "Market analysis, financial projections, implementation timeline. If it's as strong as you think it is, we'll present it to the board next quarter." Isabella's face lit up with the kind of joy I remembered from my own early career, when challenging work felt like a gift rather than a burden. "Really? You'd trust me with something that big?" "I'd trust you to earn that trust," I said. "There's a difference." That evening, I sat in my Palo Alto office, reading through Robert Hartwell's trust documents, one final time before signing them. My lawyers had found the terms fair and the structure sound. More importantly, they had convinced me that administering the trust would not create any legal conflicts with Isabella's employment. But as I prepared to add my signature to the papers that would make me responsible for Isabella's financial future, I found myself thinking about the broader implications of what I had done. I had set out to destroy the people who had wronged me, and in many ways, I had succeeded. Marcus was facing prison time and professional ruin. Isabella had lost her inheritance and social status. Robert Hartwell had died, knowing that his life's work had been exposed as corrupt and ultimately worthless. But somewhere along the way, destruction had transformed into something else. Isabella had used her fall from grace as an opportunity to discover who she really was beneath the privilege and entitlement. Robert had found a way to give his daughter a better legacy than the one he had originally planned. Even Marcus, in his own broken way, had been forced to confront the hollowness of his values and choices. I signed the trust documents and locked them in my safe, where they would remain until Isabella turned 40, or until I decided she was ready to learn about her father's final gift. Then I opened my laptop and began writing an email that I had been composing in my head for months. Marcus, I know you probably never expected to hear from me again, and I want to be clear that this message is not an invitation to renew contact. I'm writing because I've been thinking about forgiveness and second chances, and I realize there's something I need to say. What you did to me was wrong. The way you left, the lies you told yourself and me about your motivations, the casual cruelty of trading our marriage for financial advantage, all of that was inexcusable. But I also realized that I played a role in creating the circumstances that made your betrayal possible. I married you knowing exactly who you were and what you valued. I spent 7 years performing a version of myself that I thought you wanted to see, rather than being honest about who I really was. I let you believe that you were settling for less when you chose me, and then I was surprised when you acted accordingly. This doesn't excuse your choices, but it does mean that I bear some responsibility for the foundation our marriage was built on. We were both living lies, and lies have a way of destroying everything they touch. I want you to know that my actions after our divorce were not primarily about hurting you, though I understand that they did. They were about refusing to be a victim of circumstances I could control. They were about using the power I had always possessed but had chosen to hide. They were about making sure that you understood the full cost of what you had thrown away. I also want you to know that I genuinely hope you find a way to build a better life for yourself. Prison will give you time to think about the person you want to be when you get out. Use that time wisely. Learn the difference between wanting someone and loving them. Learn the difference between ambition and greed. Learn that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold or traded for something shinier. I won't contact you again, and I don't expect or want a response to this message. But I wanted you to know that I don't hate you anymore. Hate requires too much energy, and I have better things to do with mine. Take care of yourself. Elena, I read the email 3 times before deleting it without sending it. Some conversations were better left unfinished. Some chapters were better left closed. Instead, I opened a new document and began drafting a business plan for the renewable energy division that Isabella had proposed. If we were going to build something new from the ashes of Robert Hartwell's empire, we might as well build something worth being proud of. 2 years later, I stood in the Nevada desert watching the final installation of solar panels on what would become the largest renewable energy project in the southwestern United States. The Vasquez-Hartwell Solar Initiative would power 3 million homes and create 15,000 jobs over the next decade. It was exactly the kind of project that proved sustainable energy could be both profitable and transformative. Isabella stood beside me, no longer the uncertain young woman who had appeared in my office begging for a chance. She was now Senior Vice President of Renewable Development and one of the most respected voices in the industry. Her proposal had been even stronger than I'd hoped, and her execution had been flawless. "Hard to believe this all started with Dad's old defense contracts," she said, shielding her eyes from the desert sun. "Hard to believe it started with your father trying to cut corners on safety inspections," I replied. "Funny how things work out." Isabella smiled, a real smile, earned through 2 years of 18-hour days and constant learning. "Elena, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Buying the company, destroying my old life, everything that came after?" I considered the question seriously. In my previous life, I had died believing that love was weakness and that trust was foolishness. In this life, I had learned that love without self-respect was indeed weakness, but that trust earned through consistent action was the foundation of everything worthwhile. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "I regret that people had to get hurt for justice to be served. But I don't regret refusing to be a victim." "What about Marcus? Do you ever think about him?" I had heard through mutual acquaintances that Marcus had been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison and had served 18 months before being released on good behavior. He was apparently working as a financial advisor for a small firm in Ohio, slowly rebuilding his career and reputation. He had never tried to contact me. Sometimes, I admitted, I hope he's learned something from everything that happened. I hope he's found a way to value people for who they are, rather than what they can do for him. And us? Do you regret hiring me? I looked at Isabella, really looked at her. The designer clothes had been replaced by practical work attire. The perfect manicure had been replaced by hands that weren't afraid of getting dirty. The entitled expression had been replaced by the quiet confidence that came from earning respect rather than inheriting it. Hiring you was one of the best business decisions I've ever made, I said honestly. You've exceeded every expectation I had. Business decision, Isabella repeated with a slight smile. Is that all it was? It was a fair question. Over the past 2 years, our professional relationship had evolved into something that resembled friendship, though we were both too careful to name it that. We shared meals when we traveled, we consulted each other on major decisions, and we had developed the kind of shorthand communication that only came from spending countless hours working toward shared goals. But there was also the complicated history between us. The fact that she had been engaged to my ex-husband. The fact that I had deliberately destroyed her family's fortune. The fact that I was secretly managing her inheritance without her knowledge. These were not the foundations of a simple friendship. It started as a business decision, I said carefully. What it became was more complicated. Isabella nodded as if she had expected that answer. For what it's worth, I'm grateful for all of it, even the painful parts, especially the painful parts. I was a terrible person before you came into my life, and I didn't even know it. You weren't terrible, Isabella. You were just unfinished. That evening, we celebrated the project completion with dinner at a small restaurant in Las Vegas. As we sat across from each other in a booth designed for tourists and gamblers, I found myself thinking about the strange journey that had brought us here. Elena, Isabella said suddenly, there's something I need to tell you. My stomach tightened. Had she somehow discovered the trust fund? Had someone told her about the recording of Marcus that I'd never should have played for her? I'm leaving the company, she continued. Whatever I had been expecting, it wasn't that. What? Why? Because I'm ready to build something of my own. You've taught me everything I need to know about running a business, about making hard decisions, about earning respect instead of demanding it. But I can't spend the rest of my career working for the woman who destroyed my old life, no matter how grateful I am for the new one you helped me build. I felt something that might have been panic. Isabella, if this is about money or title, or it's not about any of those things. It's about proving to myself that I can succeed without your guidance. It's about moving from redemption to independence. She was right, of course. I had always known this moment would come. Isabella was too smart and too ambitious to remain someone's employee forever, no matter how much autonomy and responsibility she was given. What are you planning to do? I'm starting a consulting firm focused on helping traditional energy companies transition to renewable sources. There are hundreds of coal and natural gas companies that need to evolve or die, and most of them don't know where to start. I want to be the bridge between their old business models and their new ones. It was a brilliant idea, exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had made her so valuable to my company. You'll need significant startup capital. I have some savings, and I've been talking to investors. I think I can raise what I need. Isabella paused, then looked directly at me. I was hoping you might consider being one of those investors. The request caught me completely off guard. After everything we had been through, she was asking me to fund her departure from my company. You want me to invest in my competition? I want you to invest in someone you believe in, and I want to prove that everything you taught me wasn't wasted. I stared at her across the table, this woman who had entered my life as an enemy and somehow become what? A protege? A friend? A reminder that people could change if they were given the right incentives and opportunities? How much do you need? $5 million for the first year. $10 million would give me enough runway to really build something substantial. It was a significant investment, but not an unreasonable one given Isabella's track record and the market opportunity she had identified. More importantly, it was a chance to complete the circle that had started with revenge and evolved into something much more complex. I'll give you the 10 million, I said, but I want 15% equity and a seat on your board. Isabella's eyes widened. Really? Just like that? Just like that. But Isabella! I leaned forward across the table. I want you to understand something. This isn't charity and it's not guilt money. This is me betting on your ability to succeed. Don't make me regret it. I won't, she said. And for the first time since I'd known her, she looked like she might cry. Elena, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me. Don't thank me, succeed. Build something worth being proud of. Prove that second chances matter. 6 months later, I received an email with the subject line, Hartwell Energy Transitions, first quarter results. Isabella's consulting firm had exceeded all projections, signing 12 major clients and generating over $3 million in revenue in its first 90 days of operation. The email included a personal note. Elena, I know you taught me that gratitude should be expressed through results rather than words, so I hope these numbers convey what I can't adequately say. You saved my life in ways I'm still discovering. Thank you for believing I could become someone worth believing in. Isabella. I forwarded the report to my investment team with a note recommending that we increase our stake in Isabella's company. Then I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of genuine satisfaction. In my previous life, I had died believing that betrayal was the end of the story. In this life, I had learned that betrayal could be the beginning of something entirely different. Not just revenge, but transformation. Not just punishment, but the possibility of becoming better than the people who had wronged you. Marcus had taught me that love without self-respect was worthless. Isabella had taught me that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the work. Robert Hartwell had taught me that even corrupt men could recognize wisdom when they saw it. But perhaps most importantly, I had taught myself that power used wisely could create something more valuable than revenge. The opportunity to build a world where people like Isabella could discover their better selves and where people like Marcus could face the consequences of their choices without destroying everything around them. It wasn't the ending I had planned when I first opened my eyes in this second life, but it was, perhaps, a better ending than I had dared to hope for. 3 years later, I received an unexpected phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Elena, it's Marcus. I almost hung up immediately, but something in his voice, a quality I'd never heard before, made me pause. Marcus, this is unexpected. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know you said you never wanted to speak again, but I'm calling because I owe you something. And I've been trying for 3 years to figure out how to give it to you. I don't want anything from you, Marcus. I know, that's what makes this so hard. He was quiet for a moment. Elena, I want to apologize. Not the kind of apology where I ask for forgiveness or try to make myself feel better. The kind where I acknowledge what I did and take full responsibility for it. I found myself genuinely curious about what he might say. I'm listening. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too stupid and selfish to recognize its value. I threw away a woman who would have loved me forever because I was chasing money and status and some fantasy of what I thought I deserved. I convinced myself that you weren't enough, when the truth was that I wasn't enough for you. The words were ones I had waited 7 years to hear in my previous life and 4 years to hear in this one. But now that I was hearing them, I felt only a distant sadness for the man who had taken so long to understand such basic truths. Prison gave me a lot of time to think, Marcus continued, about the choices I made, about the person I was, about what really matters. And what I realized is that you were never the consolation prize I convinced myself you were. You were the grand prize that I was too blind to see. Marcus, please let me finish. I know there's no chance of us ever being together again. I know I destroyed that possibility completely. But I needed you to know that I understand now what I lost. I needed you to know that every day since I left you has been a lesson in regret. I was quiet for a long time, processing the conversation I had never expected to have. What do you want from me, Marcus? Nothing, absolutely nothing. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything. You were right about Isabella, about me, about what our marriage really meant. And I wanted you to know that if I could go back and choose differently, I would choose you. Every time, without hesitation, I would choose you. It was everything I had once desperately wanted to hear, but now, sitting in my office surrounded by the empire I had built and the life I had created, it felt like a message from a different lifetime. I appreciate you telling me that, I said finally. I hope it brings you some peace. It does. And Elena, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I've been following your company in the news, and what you've built is incredible. You deserved someone who would have celebrated your success instead of feeling threatened by it. After we hung up, I sat alone in my office thinking about closure and second chances and the strange ways that stories end. Marcus had finally given me the apology I had once needed so desperately. But by the time it arrived, I had already forgiven him and moved beyond the need for his validation. That evening, I called Isabella to tell her about the conversation. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Grateful," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of the answer. Grateful that I learned to value myself enough that his apology didn't change anything about my life. Grateful that I built something strong enough that his regret couldn't shake it, and grateful that you didn't need him to recognize your worth in order to know it yourself. Exactly. We were quiet for a moment, both of us understanding that this phone call represented the final chapter of a story that had begun with betrayal and revenge and had somehow transformed into something much more complex and meaningful. "Elena," Isabella said finally, "I have something to tell you too." "What's that?" "I'm getting married." This was news that caught me completely off guard. Married to whom? "His name is David. He's a renewable energy engineer I met through work. He's kind and brilliant, and he makes me want to be a better person every day." Isabella's voice was full of happiness. "I wanted you to be the first to know because you taught me what it means to choose someone for the right reasons." I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that I recognized as genuine joy. "Isabella, that's wonderful news. When's the wedding?" 6 months from now. We're having a small ceremony in Napa Valley. Eliana, I know this might be weird given our history, but I was hoping you might consider being my matron of honor." The request was so unexpected that I actually laughed. "Your matron of honor, Isabella? I'm the woman who destroyed your family's fortune. You're the woman who saved my life. You're the woman who taught me how to work and how to love and how to recognize my own worth. You're the closest thing I have to family." The words hit me harder than I had expected. In both of my lives, I had been essentially alone. No siblings, no close friends, no chosen family to speak of. The idea that Isabella considered me family was both touching and terrifying. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Elena, you gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve it. You taught me how to earn respect instead of demanding it. You showed me what it looks like to build something meaningful instead of just inheriting something hollow. If that's not what family does for each other, I don't know what is." I found myself crying. Not the bitter tears of my previous life, but tears of gratitude for the unexpected gift of belonging somewhere. "Yes," I said, "I would be honored to be your matron of honor." 6 months later, I stood beside Isabella in a vineyard in Napa Valley, watching her marry a man who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. David was everything Marcus hadn't been. Genuine, thoughtful, more interested in Isabella's mind than her bank account. He had fallen in love with the woman she had become, not the woman she had been born to be. As I watched them exchange vows, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. I had set out to destroy Isabella's life and had ended up helping her build a better one. She had started as my enemy and had become my chosen family. The revenge I had planned so carefully had transformed into something I had never expected. Redemption for both of us. During the reception, Isabella pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have told you years ago." My stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. "What is it?" "I know about the trust fund." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What trust fund?" Isabella smiled gently. My father's trust fund. The one you've been administering for the past 4 years. The one that's worth about $50 million now, thanks to your investment management. I stared at her, my mind racing through all the possible ways she could have discovered the truth. How long have you known? I figured it out about 6 months after I started my consulting firm. I was reviewing my credit report and noticed some financial activity that didn't make sense. I hired a private investigator to look into it, and he traced it back to the trust. Isabella, I can explain. You don't need to explain anything. I understand exactly why my father set it up that way, and I understand exactly why you agreed to administer it. You wanted to make sure I never forgot the lessons I'd learned. You wanted to make sure I kept earning my own way instead of falling back on inherited wealth. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Are you angry? Angry. Elena, I'm grateful. Do you know what it's meant to me, knowing that I built my consulting firm with my own effort and your belief in me, rather than with family money? Do you know how proud I am that I succeeded because of my own work? But the trust was always yours. I was just managing it. No, you were protecting me from it. You were making sure I became someone who deserved it before I ever knew it existed. Isabella took my hands in hers. Elena, that trust fund gave me back my inheritance, but you gave me back my self-respect. I know which gift is more valuable. I felt the last piece of guilt I'd been carrying about my revenge finally fall away. What happens now? Do you want to take control of the trust? Actually, I was hoping we could modify it. I want to turn it into a foundation that helps other people make the kind of transformation I was able to make. I want to use it to give second chances to people who've lost everything and need to rebuild their lives. It was a perfect idea. Exactly the kind of forward-thinking project that Isabella had become known for. What would you call it? The Second Chances Foundation, and I want you to run it with me. As we stood together in that vineyard, surrounded by the celebration of Isabella's new beginning, I realized that my story of revenge had become something entirely different. A story of grace. I had set out to punish the people who had wronged me and had somehow ended up creating a family, building an empire, and discovering that the best revenge was not destruction, but transformation. In my previous life, I had died broken and alone, believing that betrayal was the end of every story. In this life, I had learned that betrayal could be the beginning of something beautiful. If you were brave enough to choose hope over bitterness, growth over stagnation, and love over revenge. Marcus had wept when he discovered I'd bought Isabella's father's company, just as the title had promised. But his tears had been just the beginning of a much larger story. One that ended not with his destruction, but with all of us becoming better versions of ourselves. It wasn't the revenge I had planned. It was something far more valuable. The discovery that the best way to heal from betrayal was not to become like the people who had hurt you, but to become so much better that their actions became irrelevant. As Isabella and David danced their first dance as husband and wife, I raised my champagne glass in a silent toast to second chances, to chosen family, and to the beautiful unpredictability of grace. The story was finally complete, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was genuinely happy with the ending.